Well, we were just talking. We finally made it. Reminds me of my dating days when I had to ask 42 times
Oh,
to get a gay to go and after the one you like a lot. But welcome, Vanessa, to the Leaders Who Care series.
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time.
No, this is going to be a sustainable conversation, I think,
It
or something
is.
to that effect. So why don't we start in the most obvious place? If you could briefly introduce yourself, not the business stuff yet. Men are the worst for that. They tell me their title and their this and that right away. Where are you from originally? Where you are now? Both right this second and in general, and maybe anything you want to tell about family or things like that. Let us know a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Silicon Valley, which is a wonderful place. It's a wonderful culture of kind of innovation and experimentation and all sorts of different cultures. There's over 100 languages, I think, spoken here every day. So there's this wonderful diversity of cultures that are here in Silicon Valley. And I'm actually not in Silicon Valley anymore, but I've traveled back to Silicon Valley. I'm in SFO right now as we speak, taking this podcast
All
because I
right.
wasn't going to miss it.
Um,
Um, and my whole kind of mantra or my passion in life is really looking about how sustainability can help businesses become more innovative. How can sustainable organizations be so much more innovative than their peers? Why is it that they're able to develop IP quicker? Why is it that they're able to hold talent better, and able to attract leadership? And also, why are they able to quicker to go to market? So, what were those things? And those kind of led me on my journey that I am on today is the kind of curiosity about all of those things. So that's kind of how I led my journey. But
well,
all
I'm
of
going to
my,
call time out. I'm really good at
sure.
introducing. That's a good introduction. You remind me of Robin Williams a little bit,
Oh,
where
I've
they would ask
I've
him,
met him.
so Robin, and then you don't have to say anything because Robin just goes from there. Kind of thing. I haven't met him. Did you meet him?
I've met him. Yes, I've met him a few times.
Oh, very cool. I've met Max, his son, and stuff, but I haven't unfortunately, I think Robin was a genius actually. But I want to go back a little bit when you were growing up and whatnot. What were you like as a kid? And then a teenager? Were you into science? Were you into sports? Were you into music? What was going on for you at that time?
Yeah, I was always really interested in ecosystems as a kid, which sounds like a
How
funny
old
thing
were
to be
you when you
interested.
could hold it? How old were you when you can say ecosystems?
Oh, probably, 6 or 7 or so. I'd start learning about at least how different bodies are able to interact. So I really was fascinated, especially at that age. I was really fascinated with bees and beekeeping because they're kind of the intersection of all of these different ecosystems and living bodies within a forest.
Yeah.
And 1/3 of our food comes from bees. They're so important and yet so invisible to most of us, but their survival is also our survival in many ways. So I became a beekeeper very
Wow.
young
I
in
love
life
it.
and learned about kind of the intersection of all of these different fields from, biology, science, ecosystems. And it became something that was really fascinating to me because they're also very, very vulnerable to the way that we can impact them. At the time, we didn't really know why there was a massive kind of die-off of the bees. We thought maybe it had something to do with phone signals or pesticides. And today we've kind of narrowed it down to pesticides being the reason. But at the time, we weren't quite sure why there was so many bees dying. And I was able to learn so much about their behavior. And there's a lot in terms of leadership as well, too. We're talking about leadership in this conversation that's coming from bees and how they communicate. A lot of them are mysterious in the sense that their aerodynamics don't make sense to modern physicists today. They shouldn't be able to fly given the surface area on their wings and given the weight of their bodies. So there's a lot of kind of mystery around them as well too. So that was kind of one thing that I was very fascinated by.
Can I
But I read
I want to interrupt you for a second. I
go
had read
ahead.
something about obviously the queen bee's the queen bee, and she's like the most important by far. But I read something I didn't know. If sometimes a bee needed special honey or special something that the other bees brought her to become the queen bee. Is there something like that?
They do have to feed her quite regularly. I know that. I'm not, a bee expert by any means. There might be something that I'm missing in that regards, but I do know that they have to keep feeding her in order for her to be able to lay eggs and things like that as well.
No.
And that if the hive wants to move, she has to like kind of starve herself for a few weeks to get light enough to fly. So
Is she
there's, if
eating
you
that
want to
much?
she's eating that much. Yes.
Jeez.
Um,
That's actually quite amazing.
yeah,
she could have been the poster child for Weight Watchers or something.
exactly.
Very
Untapped
interesting.
market right there.
Interesting. Thanks. Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things that that kind of got me interested in was our kind of reliance on nature and how we intersect with it, because there's a lot of separation in our modern lives from nature. And I read this book from Mark Tursick, and it's called Nature's Fortune. And it basically talked about how nature can be an investment. And he's a former banker. He worked at Goldman Sachs and became a partner, and then left to run the Nature Conservancy. And he was able to conserve more forests than a lot of environmentalists were able to do. And I thought that was so interesting that he was really able to use his background in finance to actually be able to conserve more forests than a lot of environmentalists. And the reason for that was that he was able to speak the language of business and the language of investment in nature. So nature actually provides so many different services that businesses need. One of them is clean water, clean air, all of these sorts of things that are actually huge problems in many parts of the world and in many regions of this country. And so something like a water filtration plant, New York City, for example, was going to invest in a multi-billion-dollar water filtration plant for the city. Mark Tercek and the Nature Conservancy actually invested in the swampland surrounding New York City to filter much of the water, and were able to actually reduce the price of that water filtration plant by a few billion. So that's what's one interesting case study where you're actually able to use the services of nature to provide a service to a business. And so that was something that really got me interested in how we can kind of think about our interaction with nature, and what are some investments that we can be making in something that may seem intangible, but is really helpful to all of our businesses?
Did you learn about that? When did you learn about that? How old were you? Or was this
I
before or
was
after?
13 when I first read his book. Yes. And
Wow.
that kind of started me on a trajectory of how can we get more involved with sustainability in business. I, originally thought that these were kind of separate things. And of course, there's this ideology that, of course, a business can do well and do good, but sustainability is not the reason that they're doing well or the reason that they're able to innovate. And so that's kind of what got me on that entire trajectory in life.
So is that why you studied economics at Berkeley and then finance at Santa Clara, got your MBA?
Yeah, that was really a core reason for it. And
Hmm.
I had already started working for a Nobel Peace Prize winner at UC Berkeley in his climate lab and publishing research with him. And he kind of also helped me kind of broaden my horizons into many of this. But I really wanted to pursue how could we actually help an organization innovate and grow because of sustainability, because of great leadership. What is it about some of these organizations? And I started to notice this. I've now worked in venture capital groups, I've worked in startups, I've worked in all of these different kind of environments, bigger organizations like the UN Foundation, and then smaller kind of fast growing startups. And I really noticed that clean tech organizations were able to run so much leaner. And that kind of caught my curiosity as to what is it about the structure of that organization that's able to run so much leaner, that's able to innovate so much quicker, which is why I wanted to study both of those things and think about how can I break that down, which is one of the things I did in my book, kind of breaking down what is it about a leadership strategy surrounding sustainability or impact that would then lead to greater innovation in the organization. What's the correlation between those two?
And when did you work for the Jane Goodall Institute at all or intern or something?
Um, yes, so I was actually on the student board of the Roots and Shoots Council, which is her for young people and students and academics, her council. And that was an incredible experience. I was able to meet the head of CSR for Disney at the time, and they flew us down there to talk about some of the sustainability work that they've done. We were able to meet people all across the country. I represented at the time Northern California. And it was a really incredible experience. But I think one of the things that's so inspiring of Dr. Jane Goodall, just as a human being, is that she always tried to find the win-win. She always was thinking about what is the motivation of all of the stakeholders in a particular organization. And that's one of the reasons why her work's also been so incredibly successful, that she's been able to scale it past what a lot of her peers were not able to do, because she's constantly thinking about let me listen to my stakeholders. Let me think about what is the motivation, what is the incentive for each of these people, and then how can I integrate that with my own incentives? And I think that that's something that, traditionally a lot of us don't take the time and pause to do, but it's something that I think a lot of great leaders do, and it's certainly something that Jane Goodall has been able to do and being able to scale her work because of it.
Yeah, I think you're a million percent right. When you're more interested than being interesting about yourself, things usually work out a lot better. People want to be around
Yeah.
you, they want to do stuff with you, you have common goals, and then you can pound your chest like all her friends do after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is brilliant. And one thing I want to touch on here that I think is so great is the lesson you're giving to other young people about how much value there is to even volunteer for some of the things that you're talking about and just get exposure to some of the things you're talking about
Hmm.
that can open up your eyes for things you may never see unless
Hmm.
you ask to get into them. Obviously, you had that curiosity before, but that's a big part of where leaders really come from is by getting exposure to the leaders you're talking about, I would think, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of community building surrounding whatever kind of mission or kind of vision that you have for yourself entails. So for me, sustainability is a kind of core crux of something that speaks deeply to my heart. But it's actually been a way that I've been able to connect with so many different people as well too. Whenever I meet another environmentalist, there's a automatic connection. I go across the room and they're like, "Hey, we're on the same side. We have to help one another. We have to network. We have to support one another on our projects as well too." And so for a lot of the young people, listening to a show like this, finding something like that is a wonderful way to build community, which is so important whenever you're thinking about starting an organization or even being a change maker within an organization. Community is so vital. So when you have that motivation, you have that mission that speaks truly to you, you're actually able to attract a wonderfully powerful community to actually make those dreams happen.
Yeah, I'm just going to asterisk one word you said, or two words. We're on the same side. I think it's actually great to meet people from the other side, whatever that is, too, because we all have maybe great ideas, and maybe we all should be listening to each other a little bit more and hear what those ideas are. And then what happens is the edge is taken off, and maybe both sides learn something and can be on the same side as well. So that's something I think a leader does also is bring people together because everybody has value. And but I do love the part about when you're young and you're in high school, especially when there's so much you haven't seen yet, and there's so much you might not even know you're interested in sustainability or A, B, or C, and just get on something, and whether it's a certain sport or science or something, and meet some great people, and then you'll find where you can be a leader at. At least I think. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't mean other side as in there's one side or another. I mean more so that we share, a similar interest more
Okay.
so than anything. Because I think that there's a lot of people who we can connect with because of their motivation. So I
Right.
find that's true with any group of people, whether you're talking about any kind of diverse group of people. When you're able to connect with them on a core mission that speaks truly to their heart, you're able to attract them and bring them into your community. So I mean it more so as we share a similar interests. We're able to connect on this particular point. So for one group of people, maybe it's, sustainability and talking about nature. For another group, it might be giving back to their community and thinking about economic well-being for their community. It might be a different mission depending on who you're talking to, but when you're able to find that core mission that speaks truly to that particular group, you're able to connect with them on a much deeper level and actually build those long-term relationships that are necessary for business or any kind of change that you want to do within an organization.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I think talented people are still as they say, the number one asset, even over
Yeah.
technology. And the more we meet people, the more we learn, the more you might say, "Wow, I didn't know this existed," and I'm psyched about it. And and right place, right time sometimes too. Were there any experiences or inflection points? It sounds like there were that really drove you to drove your career to the next step into where we're going to talk about sustainability experts. But were there any that were special, that were extra special?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I mean, I kind of mentioned it before in terms of the kind of innovative culture of Silicon Valley that's being an influence kind of throughout this entire journey. But there was one kind of fun moment where I was at, UC Berkeley, and there's these wonderful, great fairs that we have where we're showcasing all of the innovations that come out of the student laboratories and other academics and researchers kind of showcasing these technologies. And there was this one kid who had built a microscope that could go on your iPhone. And
Wow.
I came over to his, booth, and I was like, "Oh, that's so cool. Can I look at it?" And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, but just be careful because the glue is still drying." So I think one fun thing that's kind of true about Silicon Valley is that there's this constant need to innovate. There's this constant kind of creativity that comes from that. And so it's kind of an example, I would say, of something that I wanted to foster throughout each and every organization that I touch is how to create a culture of creativity and enough psychological safety that we're able to innovate and adapt, fail fast, learn things from it, and be able to continue to be competitive in the market. And so I think that's kind of one fun example of a kind of a whole kind of culture within Silicon Valley. And I think that that mindset has certainly spread to other areas of the world as well too. But it's one kind of example that I always think back on of how can we think about creating something right here in this moment, and how would that be helpful to others?
Yeah, I agree. And imagination is something that we should be, talking about a lot. This curiosity, imagination, whatever you want. It's great that there's all the space stuff going on right now because I know when I was a kid, you know, there were astronauts and we were watching this with awe, what they're doing and everything, and everybody wanted to be an astronaut or a fireman or something. But I mean, so you're right on the money, and that
Yeah,
curiosity, that imagination just creates so much stuff later. You just got to make sure that you're
yeah,
careful and you don't break it because the glue is still drying, type of deal. So that's that's cute.
yeah.
Our firm was actually founded on the premise of leaders who care about that you can make great
Hmm.
money and do better in business when you do good at the same time. And
Hmm.
I remember a quote by a young lady in Nigeria. She learned how to play chess when she was little, and she got a little better, then she got a little more better. There's a good
Hmm.
English word. Then she got some training, and long story short, she ended up going international and got better. And they said, "Well, how do you feel when you don't win?" She said, I never
Hmm.
lose." And they said, "Well, you're not winning all the time, so how is that possible?" She said, "I win and I learn, but I never lose."
Hmm.
And I think that attitude, you mentioned it,
Hmm.
from failure and success, you can learn a lot. And I think that that's important for us to always, always like embrace and support people that are creating and creating and creating,
Yeah.
because you will fail, but that means you're on the right path.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think building a culture of resilience is so vital to any kind of mission that you're on. And I think it's certainly something that I've been able to see with a lot of mission-driven businesses as well too, that it almost kind of helps people create that resilience within an organization in the sense that if you have a large mission for your organization, you say, "Hey, we're going to hit this moon mission where we're going to help this many people, or we're going to save this much water," or whatever that mission might be, you're able to actually create kind of some trial and error and resilience through those times because you're saying it's okay if we fail on these 10. But if we're able to get it just once, if we're able to get it right just once, we get to save these many people or help this many people or impact the world in a better way in this way. So I think that one of the things that I think more organizations are starting to realize is that when you really tap into whatever mission speaks truly to you, you're able to actually create a lot more innovation and resilience. And this is something I've seen with a lot of businesses that I've written about in my book as well too. There's this one example, of course, with Interface. A lot of people know about Interface. It's considered to be one of the most environmental organizations in the United States and the most innovative. And it originally was one of the dirtiest or the most polluting organizations. And it made a complete, 180 in the other direction from actually lobbying representatives in Congress to say, hey, we have to pollute to run our business, to actually setting a standard for new environmental regulations. So a complete 180 that they're able to do. But Ray Anderson, originally was not able to convince much of his board or much of his people. He made this 180 when they were already public. And he suddenly decided that he wanted to become sustainable and innovative and set a whole new trajectory. And originally, he was not able to convince people. In fact, his board was against it, his engineers were against it, his whole leadership team was against it. And it actually took 2 years of him convincing his entire organization for the first set of engineers to take that first step to say, we're going to create this first patent. And it was that first patent, that first baby step, towards that new mission that was able to create a whole, momentum of, motivation amongst the employees. And nowadays people go to Interbase and hope to work there for the mission that they have. And a lot of these engineers stay there 30, 40 years, which is unheard of in today's standards to actually stay at one organization for
Mhm.
that long. So
It
sometimes it takes a while for a lot of these things to kick in. But the baby steps, I think, are really a key thing when we think about how can we break all of these things down into baby steps and what's our first initial early win.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, brilliant. It reminds me of Paul Pullman with Unilever a little bit too, where he changed how Unilever was
Yeah.
looking at things, and it took a while. You know, and what's that
Hmm.
old line? If they call you crazy, you're probably on the right path, type of thing, as to what's going on. And the thing that I found with some companies is talking about the ROI. You know, if talking about failure in the ROI, if you fire somebody right away because they made a mistake, or if I do a lot of sports analogies, if you bench or trade a player because they made a mistake,
Mm,
you're losing the knowledge, you're losing a lot of stuff. Now, if you're there's an expression we use a lot, clear is kind. The clearer you are, the kinder you are with people. They know exactly what's going on,
mm,
etc. And if you take that employee or that player and say, this is what you did wrong, and you treat them with respect and you're clear about it, they'll love that. You told them that, and then you keep them and you put them back to work on whatever they're working on, or back on the field, or back on the ice to play.
hmm,
That employee is going to be unbelievably loyal and passionate.
mm,
They learn something, someone believes in me, they care about me, and you don't lose their knowledge. You don't have to train someone new to do that. And so I think, which is kind of where Leaders Who Care partially comes from too, is if we really do care about people, we will do better in business and our ROI will do
mm.
better. And you talked about it. You kept employees for 30 years because they wanted to
Yeah.
be there. So it's just taken us 9,000 years for people to get it. Um, but we're there, and people like you are making those things happen. Talk about what you do with sustainability experts, how you evolved and got into that position, and what's the
Yeah.
vision mission there, and what is it all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll just comment on something you said there and just add on to it
Sure.
that I think also that there's a level of risk taking that you lose if you're not able to allow mistakes and allow that kind of creativity as well too. And risk taking is something that's so important for innovation and creativity. You have to be able to have people to take risks, take those big leaps of faith so that you can
Right.
find new IP, that you can find new products, that you're able to find new opportunities in the market. So I love that analogy that you created. But yeah, the Sustainability Experts is an organization that all started out of when I started to write the book. So a book publisher reached out to me, and I had worked at the World Bank. I had worked at the Nature Conservancy, and of course, I mentioned a few startups and venture capital groups as well too. And he said, we really want someone who's talking about sustainability and innovation. We don't have that in our book portfolio, and we'd love for you to be the person to write that. So he initially kind of reached out to me based on the research I had done at UC Berkeley, and asked me to write this book. And of course, at first, I said no. No one has time to write a book initially. Um, but eventually, I realized that this is something I really wanted to share with the world. I think that would be helpful to a lot of organizations and to a lot of people that need to be thinking outside the box, especially with a lot of uncertainty in the market, uncertainty in their organizations, or even in their own roles or lives. I think a lot of us face a lot of uncertainty and need to find new ways to be creative and to have ROI come out of that creativity as well too. Um, so I started writing this book and I really wanted it to be case study based because I wanted to be actual examples of businesses and individuals who've been able to take a complete pivot. So I mentioned Ray Anderson, where he completely went this 180 between being an organization that was very traditional, non-innovative, and becoming an incredibly innovative leader in the market. And I wanted to include other examples like this because I feel the real case studies are something that are actually able to give us the real lessons that we need to know, not just
Yeah.
theoreticals or theoretical research. Tell me about actual people who've been able to do this. So I gathered around 60 case studies in the research from the book. And that kind of started to go into a podcast. I run my own podcast as well now too. We have different CEOs in different areas that are able to come on and talk about impact leadership. We had Olympian Venus Williams come on and talk about the three businesses that she runs and the journey that she's gone on to be there. We've had other CEOs and other CXOs that have come on and talk about their leadership transformation stories as well too. To talk about some of those transformations that take place and hopefully to be motivating to people who are listening to those shows as well. And so that kind of started with speaking internationally as well too about how can I help organizations become more innovative? What are the lessons from those case studies and that research that'll be helpful? And I really try to always go back to the market and go back to the case studies to think about how it's going to be useful because I think theoreticals are not always helpful for individuals. So really always going back to what's actually happened, what actually worked, and what were all of the messy steps along the way to make that thing a reality. So I do, workshops, I do case studies, I, work with individual clients as well too. And
And
so
you
that's kind
thought you
of
had
what
no
launched
time,
the sustainability.
and you thought you had no time to write a book.
I know. I just keep talking myself into more roles as I go on here.
Um,
I'm sure you feel the same way with leaders who care as well.
Yeah, and but you know what's inspiring, especially in this world today, is that you meet people like you and so many others that are doing great things,
Mm,
and you know it's medicine for me
mm.
just to overcome all the other stuff that's happening in the world to see that there's way more great people that are doing fantastic
Yeah.
stuff. And to your point about the risk taking, 1,000,000%. You don't win the championship in sports. You don't invent whatever you were going to invent if you're just, trying things a little
Playing it
bit.
safe.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, you got to be, as they say in sports, the GOAT and make it happen
Mhm.
type type of deal.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
And just to mention on what you said on meeting great people as well too, I think that it's so easy to get overwhelmed by all of the problems that we're each facing, and especially when you care about a lot of these missions, whether it's sustainability or your community or thinking about social justice, whatever it happens to be that really speaks deeply to you, it can feel incredibly overwhelming when you look at the problem. But when you look at all of the people who are trying to solve it, it's so wonderfully inspiring. I mean, it was wonderful to write this book and see all these wonderful leaders and these case studies throughout this entire example because there's so many people creating amazing products. There's this one case study that I read about where there's this whole river of pollution in the Appalachian Mountains from the coal mining, and it's turning all the rivers bright orange and it's becoming this plague on this particular community, killing animals, wildlife, human beings are getting sick. It's just this awful thing. And a water plant engineer and a painter came together and realized that if you take the iron sediment pollution out of the river and you bake it, it becomes safe and actually can be turned into paint. And it becomes this beautiful paint for artists. So not only are they selling this incredible paint that's a very unique color spectrum for artists, but they're also saving this entire community. And there's all of these examples like that. And I encourage anyone who has a passion to really look at who are all the leaders who are actually solving the problem because it's a wonderful way to get inspired yourself by seeing there are so many people trying to solve this problem. And normally they're completely overlooked in many regards as well.
yeah, it's something you might think that's already saturated and it's already done. Maybe even there's a little thing that changes it, type of thing.
Hmm.
And it also applies, I think, like you said, so many problems. Sometimes we're overwhelmed that you don't do anything. You don't need to
Hmm.
save the world, is kind of what you're saying. You can be doing it with a whole
Yeah.
bunch of other people, and you might bring that one thing that that painter or whoever you were talking about brought to the table, who I'm sure,
Yeah.
I'm assuming he didn't have a PhD or this or that. He was probably just a smart guy that knew what was going on, and
Yeah.
which happens, a lot. And so you don't have to be frustrated and just say, I give up because you think it's not enough to solve this
Hmm.
massive problem. Just solve a little problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of these leaders didn't know how they were going to solve the problem initially when they start out on it. Even with that kind of one thinking about just this river, I'm just going to clean this river for this particular community. They didn't necessarily know the solution when they first started out on that. They actually experimented. They had trials and errors. We talked about risk taking, they were able to create that culture, at least within their small team, to be able to create that risk taking and that innovation to make that happen. Ray Anderson didn't know that he was going to come up with all of these patents. Some of these patents that are used in recycled materials are actually used by Adidas now and Gucci, and a lot of big designer brands are actually using these patents. But he didn't know that when he first started out. They started out with this mission and this community. And they said, how are we going to empower this community and enable this community? I think this is why the work that you do is also so important because you're thinking about the leaders who care. You're thinking about that's the actual foundation for many of these technologies, is actually thinking
Right.
about the community and the leadership and the culture itself and empowering them and resourcing them and saying, here's our mission, here's our North Star, here's how we're going to fight to get there, and experimenting along the way until we actually come up with a solution. It's easy to look back and say, wow, they were so brilliant. They came up with a solution. You didn't see the other 1,000 times they failed and they thought they were going to give up before they reached that solution as well, too.
Yeah, no, brilliant. The other thing it does is it actually, I don't want to say world peace because that sounds so whatever, but it does bring economic development and trying to solve a problem does bring people together also. There's an organization of all places in the Middle East called Eco Peace Middle East, where the Palestinians, Jordanians, and Israelis are working together on bringing water to all the people, solar energy, agriculture, and there's youth working together even in the war-torn ridiculousness of everything going
Mm,
on. Um, that passion that you're talking about, the caring, the solving something, the curiosity, the imagination brings people together in amazing
mhm.
ways that is a lot better than fighting and stuff,
Yeah.
And so many good things that, that come out of it. A couple more questions, or, we say in LA we got to keep them wanting more so we can do a sequel. So we may have to
Sure, let's do
we may
it.
have to do that. But the infamous AI is fast and furious right now.
Mhm.
Some people are terrified of it, some people are loving it, everybody in between. There's always pros and cons to everything. Um, what's ahead for you, keeping with that in mind, everything that's going on with AI, in your short term, in your long term? How is it affecting you, in your career, but even personally, physically, mentally, the whole bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just staying on the same theme of talking about leadership and culture, and AI as well too, is that I just was reading a study recently that actually a lot of the same leadership traits that we use for human teams are actually now also very effective with agentic plus human teams. So now we're seeing more and more that every employee is going to have a co-pilot. Essentially, every employee is going to have an assistant that's able to scale the work that they do much faster.
Right.
And so, kind of whatever we're doing in predictions for our long term, the reality is that agentic AI is really enabling each and every one of us to have our own personal assistant or
Yeah.
series of assistants to help us get the work that we need to do. So, when we're talking about leadership and we're talking about management, we're now talking about agentic AI plus human teams working together to be able to accomplish a task. And a lot of the similar leadership strategies that we think of when we're leading human teams are actually very effective, even when we're thinking about a team that's, partly agentic and partly human. And so when we're thinking about a lot of these
I
things
love
like,
that.
psychological safety, we're talking about risk taking, all of these things are very important. Actually, there was this, one particular, I won't name the company, but it was a self-driving car company that was working on initially helping them to get onto the highway, the cars to get onto the highway. And the software itself did all of this analysis on all of the cars that were going to be merging onto the highway and said, it's too dangerous. I give up. And it just wouldn't go onto the highway under any circumstance. And so they actually had to program in a bit of risk taking into actually getting into the highway. So when we're thinking about agentic teams, we're thinking about human teams, all of these same things that we're trying to encourage humans to do, we actually also have to encourage agentic AI to do in a lot of ways. We have to encourage people and agentic AI to have empathy, to think about how we're going to build a good culture, how we're going to think about risk taking, how we're going to think about innovation. All of these same principles are vital, even when we're thinking about this massive technological change that's ahead of us. And so a lot of the work that I do with clients, a lot of the work that I do with teams or speaking is all surrounding actually the same core principles, but thinking about applying it in a completely new way.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing another session on just that topic alone because I love that, and I think AI could finally be the technology that allows more people to be happy than ever before, which was supposed to happen with tech and internet and all that stuff in the first place, where people will be able to be more creative, people will be able to maybe help in the community, people will be able to do stuff and think of stuff they've never thought before because they're not doing whatever they were doing before manually. I think it's a huge opportunity, and it's going to take special leaders, in my opinion, in companies to maybe not fire everybody, but maybe people can do different things that are even good for your brand in the community, and maybe they can do different things that create something in the community that you get the credit for and the branding for that helps your company. There's a whole lot of things I think that can happen positive um, if we're imaginative about even stuff that you're talking about there and leading on that and not thinking, oh, we're going to lose jobs or I don't want the robot to take my job or whatever. Let it do all the stuff faster that maybe we don't want to do and maybe that'll open up our imagination like big time.
Yeah. Well, I do think that we're certainly going to have to focus on empathetic leadership more so than ever, because I think that each and every employee is going to be much more powerful than they ever were before, in the sense that each
Right.
employee is going to be leading a team of at least 1 to 5, maybe even more agents. And so they're going to be able to accomplish more tasks, which means that we have to trust that individual employee much more than just the tasks that they were able to accomplish initially. So when we're thinking about building empathetic teams, impact leadership, this is even more important than ever before, because the impact of each and every person, each and every manager is so much greater now than it was in the past as well too. So the opportunity I think is greater, and also the risks I think are greater as well too. So when we're thinking about empathetic leadership, when we're thinking about all of these great things, leaders who care, it's really important for us to think about how we're going to create a structure around empathetic leadership and innovation, that's actually going to push us all and incentivize us all to think about how we're going to think about the long term and our communities, and not just the short term benefit.
Yeah, it's a fantastic conversation to have about all that, and I think could be a super positive one instead of the negative one that everybody are afraid of. Shout out to a company I'm working with. They're called Loving Is, and they've created they've created AI, if you will, that is leaning towards all the things you're talking about, being in a positive, caring, empathetic type of
Mm.
dealing. But so everybody knows we'll have to do a sequel on that topic. But I have one more question
All
I want to
right.
ask you on this one. After the pandemic, I think it put a lot of things on steroids. Mother Nature was slapping us in the
Mm.
head and say, get it together a little bit and stuff. And one client told me in 2021, it said 2020 was the year that flew by slowly. And you can feel it because sometimes it feels like COVID was yesterday and sometimes years ago. It's been 5 years at
Mm.
least now. So, but with all that said and everything that's going on, we just talked about, what are you most grateful for and what are you most hopeful for?
That's lovely. I think that I'm most grateful for the time I'm able to spend with my friends and family. I think that that's something that I think a lot of us felt during that crisis of that time. And I think that that's something that we kind of reestablish our values at a time of crisis like that. We realize what's important and what we
Yeah.
need to spend time on. And so I think that made me even more motivated on the work that I do as well too, and thinking about how can we give back? How can we think about building great communities that are stronger? And something that I'm looking forward to, I think, is the conversation that part of the conversation that we had, which is also thinking about how can we instill innovative and empathetic leadership into kind of the leaders of tomorrow as we think about this huge technological shift and all the crises that come in the coming decade as well too. How are we going to utilize this technology to think about how we're going to do this in the most empathetic way, in the way that benefits the most stakeholders, given that there's also going to be some rocky waters ahead as
Yeah.
well too, with some of the macroeconomic environments. So that's something I'm looking forward to.
No, that's awesome. Well, I'm grateful for having a new friend. That's pretty cool. And
Likewise.
uh, and I'm also grateful and hopeful for the fact that you are a leader who cares and you are curious and have imagination and just make stuff happen. So way to
Hmm.
go and thanks for sharing. Thanks for being on the Leaders Who Care series.
Well, likewise. Thank you so much for having me.